Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnu Pada Paramahansa Parivrajikacharya Shotra Shashi Shimad Abhaya Charanavinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jaya Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnu Pada Paramahansa Parivrajikacharya Shotra Shat Shri Shimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Namacharya Shila Haridas Thakur Ki Prem Sheke Ho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shirveta Karadara Shiva Sari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Shishi Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Shamakunda Radha Kund Kiri Govardhana Ki Jai Brindavan Dham Ki Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Yamuna Mai Ki Ganga Mai Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Tulasi Maharani Ki Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Nitai Go Premanandi. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Oh, glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 16, Verse 21. Line by line. Asmai nrpala kila tatra tatra balim harishanti shaloka palaha mam shanta esham striya adirajam shakrayutam tadyasa udarantyaha. Asmai nrpala kila tatra tatra balim harishanti shaloka palaha mam shanta esham sriya adirajam shakrudam tachasa udarantyaha. Asmai nrpala kila tatra tatra balim harishanti shaloka palaha mam shanta esham striya adirajam shakrayutan tanyasa udarantyaha. Asmai nrpala nilakatra tatra balim harishanti shaloka palaha Mam Shanta Esham Sriya Adirajam Chakrayudam Taryasa Udarantya Smai Nripala Kila Tatra Tatra Palim Harishanti Shaloka Pala Mam Shanta Esham Sriya Adirajam Chakrayudam Taryasa Udarantya Asmai Nripala Kila Tatra Tatra Palim Harishanti Shaloka Palaha Mam Shanta Esham Sriya Adirajam Chakrayudam Tadyasa Udarantya Asmai Nripala Kila Tatra Tatra Palim Harishanti Shaloka Palaha Mam Shanta Esham Sriya Adirajam Chakrayudam Tadyasa Udarantya Asmai Nripala Kila Tatra Tatra Palim Harishanti Shaloka Palaha Mam Shanta Esham Sriya Adirajam Chakrayudam Tadyasa Udarantya Asmai, unto him, Nripala, all the kings, Kila, certainly, Tatra Tatra, here and there, Balim, presentations, Harishanti, will offer, Sa, with, Loka Palaha, the demigods, Mam Shanti, will consider, Esham, of these kings, Sriya, wives, Adirajam, the original king, Shakra Ayudam, bearing the disc weapon, Tat, his, Yasha, reputation, Udarantyaha, carrying on. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Translation: when the king travels all over the world, other kings as well as the demigods will offer him all kinds of presentations. Their queens will also consider him the original king, who carries in his hands the emblem of club and disc, and will sing of his fame, for he will be as reputable as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport: as far as reputation is concerned, King Prithu is already known as the incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The word Adirajam means the original king. The original king is Narayana, or Lord Vishnu. People do not know that the original king, or Narayan, is actually the protector of all living entities. As confirmed in the Vedas, Eko Bahunam Yo Vidati Kamam, Kata Upanishad 2.2.13. Actually, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is maintaining all living entities. The king, or Nardev, is his representative. As such, the king's duty is to personally supervise the distribution of wealth for the maintenance of all living entities. If he does so, he will be as reputable as Narayana. As mentioned in this verse, Tad Yasha, Prithu Maharaj was actually carrying with him the reputation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because he was actually reigning over the world in that capacity. Om Gyanantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtabitam Yena Bhutale Soyamrapa Karamayam Tadati Svabhandantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutu Pada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sakarajitam Sahagana Raghunathavitam Tam Sajivam Saidvaitam Savarutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Ladita Shri Vishankan Vidamscha He Krishna Kuruna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostite Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Rate Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Kuresvise Namaha Vancha Kalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. It's always a real privilege to be here with you all. I really have no qualification to be here, but I'm very thankful that you're allowing me to serve. Please forgive any offenses that I may cause. So this verse falls within a chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam where King Prithu, who has emerged from the body of King Vena and who has just been coronated as king, is being showered with such praise and such gifts as well from so many different directions. We have heard that all the Brahmanas highly praised and glorified King Prithu, and the best singers of Gandharvaloka chanted his glories. The inhabitants of Siddhaloka showered flowers, and the beautiful women in the heavenly planets danced in ecstasy. We also heard that all the rivers, seas, mountains, serpents, cows, birds, animals, heavenly planets, the earthly planet and all other living entities collected various presentations according to their ability to offer to the king. We even heard that Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, and Durga Devi, Agni Dev, and all of the demigods appeared to present King Prithu with very opulent and precious gifts. But interestingly, Prithu Maharaj was receiving these gifts and receiving this praise not so much because of any actions that he had performed in this life, because he was still so young. He was still so young. He'd only recently been born and had only just been coronated as king. So why then was it that he was receiving all of this praise and all of these living entities and even divine beings were gathering to glorify him? Does anyone want to say? I'm sure you all know. Yeah, totally. Because King Prithu is understood to be partial representation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, it's mentioned that the expansion was not Vishnu Tattva, but it specifically empowered for expansion of Lord Vishnu, known as Avesha. And similarly, the female who was also emerged from the body of King Venu was a partial expansion of the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Devi. I believe the female's name was Archie, who would later become King Prithu's wife. So both of these personalities were not ordinary beings, but partial representations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so Prithu Maharaj was receiving all of this praise not so much because of actions that he had performed, but because of his inherent divine nature, which was being recognized by all these living entities. And we heard earlier in the chapter of what the evidence was, or what the proof was of this. Can anyone remember, like, what were the signs that were manifest that allowed people to understand that King Prithu was in fact a partial expansion of the Supreme? There were a couple of little hints. In verse 8 we heard about the sort of the conch shells and the drums and the kettle drums sounding throughout outer space when Prithu Maharaj was coronated, which I think is a pretty auspicious sign. But also, more sort of conclusively, when Lord Brahma appeared to offer his obeisances to Prithu Maharaj, he was able to identify these different markings on Prithu Maharaj's body, on the palms of his hands, and the soles of his feet. I think it was discs on the palm of his hand, and lotuses on the soles of his feet, and that was reflective of the fact that Prithu Maharaj was undeniably an expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so that then, I was thinking, gives us quite a simple test for anyone who may be harboring the belief that they themselves are God, that if there are no lotuses on the soles of your feet, you can sort of safely conclude that you're not in fact God. Yes, Prithu Maharaj bore on his body the markings that revealed beyond doubt his identity as a Shakyavesh avatar, incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And given that Prithu Maharaj was this incarnation, then all the praise that he was receiving was entirely appropriate and justified. And yet still, Prithu Maharaj displayed this wonderful humility in receiving this praise, and he would say to he would respond to the sages who were praising him that this sort of praise should not be given because I am yet to manifest the qualities for which you praise me, and that this praise is premature perhaps because I'm still young. I have not yet had the opportunity to demonstrate these qualities for which you are praising me. Of course it was appropriate to praise him because he was this Shakyavesh avatar worthy of all glorification, but he just displayed this wonderful humility in receiving that praise and wanting that type of praise to be reserved for those who had demonstrated saintly or godly qualities. And so even though he was empowered by the Lord, Prithu Maharaj did not become proud. Instead, he questioned whether he was even worthy of such praise. And this teaches us that real leadership, is always rooted in that humility, because he became such a great king. And this is also reminiscent of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes, where he would strongly, reject any suggestion that he was in fact God, and he would be, very elusive and not accept any suggestion that that was who he was in fact. And by doing so, he's perfectly exemplifying that mood of a pure devotee, modeling for us how to show up with all of the qualities that he, displayed in perfection in his Shikshastikam, telling us to be more humble than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree. So both Prithu Maharaj and Mahaprabhu were, these empowered incarnations of the Lord, and yet they each embodied such perfect humility and setting that highest example for us all to follow and to learn from. So given this sort of the depth of this humility, I wanted to discuss a little bit on the subject of humility, drawing from the teachings of His Grace Mahatma Prabhu, who has written so wonderfully on the topic of humility. And one of the really valuable contributions that he's made in that area is learning how to discern between two qualities which externally appear quite similar, but which are very, very different, and one is very conducive to our spiritual path and one is very detrimental to our spiritual path, and that is between humility, genuine humility on one hand, and then low self-esteem on the other hand, and how these two qualities unfortunately can sort of have a similar external appearance. And so particularly in this age where low self-esteem is quite prevalent, particularly amongst youth, it's very important to be able to discern between these two qualities and cultivate true humility and discard or slowly work through, low self-esteem. And, true humility, as we hear so often, is a divine quality which nourishes our spiritual life, whereas that insecurity and low self-esteem is, a material affliction which causes great suffering and hinders our spiritual progress. And so it's essential that we're able to discern between these two qualities, ensuring that we're cultivating a mindset that elevates us rather than debilitates us, because it's very debilitating, low self-esteem. So how to make this distinction? How can we understand the difference between the two? Srila Prabhupada would often, when discerning between that which is material and that which is spiritual, he would ask us to look at the results of that action, or look at the results of that mentality. So if a particular mindset inspires us and gives us strength, deepens our Krishna consciousness, and brings us just joy in our devotional service, then we can understand that mindset to be spiritual and to be beneficial and conducive, and one which we should be, attached to in our spiritual lives. However, if another way of thinking makes us feel unworthy and drains our enthusiasm and weakens our faith, distances us from Krishna, then by that result we can understand that mindset to be material and an obstacle to our spiritual progress. So essentially, the essence is that humility empowers us, whereas low self-esteem really paralyzes us in our spiritual path. In the 20th chapter of Majjhilila, Chaitanya Charitamrita, we hear Jivera Svaruphaya Nitya Krishna Das. It is the living entity's eternal constitutional position to be in loving service of Sri Krishna. And if that is in fact our eternal identity, then anything that helps us to understand and realize and embody that eternal identity is very positive for our spiritual life, and anything that brings us further from that understanding is an obstacle in our spiritual path. And so true humility aligns with our eternal identity as Krishna's loving servant. Humility brings us closer to realizing our Nitya Dharma, and therefore it creates within the heart a feeling of peace, a feeling of fulfillment, and faith. Whereas this low self-esteem, it is rooted in fact in false identification with the body and mind. And we hear throughout our spiritual journey a very foundational truth, which is that we are not this body, nor are we this mind. And that is because this body is temporary, and this body is aging, and this body is slowly deteriorating, and one day, not so far away from now, this body will just become part of the earth once more. And if our identity, if our self-worth is wrapped up in something that is inherently impermanent, inherently ephemeral and deteriorating at every moment, then we can understand how this will inevitably lead to insecurity and to self-doubt and to low self-esteem. Whereas if our identity and our self-worth is connected to the truth that we are eternal spiritual beings who have an eternal loving relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, if that is where our identity lies and that is where our self-worth lies, then this is an incredibly empowering realization and conducive for a very healthy self-esteem and a healthy humility. So at the essence, low self-esteem arises from the illusory identification with our body and our mind. And of course, there are many psychological complexities to the concept of low self-esteem, but essentially that is its root. The root is identification with our body and our mind, and then it leads to all these negative mental qualities and mind states which cause us so much suffering. They're so debilitating in this life to endure that. But the remedy for that is the understanding and the realization that our identity and our self-worth is not connected to our bodies and our minds, but is connected to our eternal spiritual identity as a loving servant of God. So a truly humble devotee, they know their worth in relation to Krishna. They are his servants, fully dependent on his mercy and with all this potential to love and to serve him. So they do not see themselves in the center. That's where we're not falling into any pride. You're not seeing yourself in the center, but you recognize your eternal position as part and parcel of that supreme whole. Someone suffering from low self-esteem may think, I am not worthy, I have no value, I am useless in my devotional life. But this is not humility, even though it may come across in that way. This is a distorted material perception that arises from identification with that which is not us, and it obscures our spiritual identity, our true spiritual identity. And so we can look to the humility of the great souls, of this age, like our dear Srila Prabhupada, to see the perfection of humility. Srila Prabhupada, always understood and proclaimed himself to be nothing more than a servant of Krishna, and yet he boldly preached all around the world, inspiring millions to change their lives. And so his humility was empowering, and it gave him strength. Humility doesn't make us weak, but those other qualities of low self-esteem and insecurity, they do make us weak. So if we recognize that it's causing us weakness, then we need to assess whether our feeling is in fact true humility, true spiritual humility, or one of these other material manifestations which may appear similar. And similarly, Prithu Maharaj's response to glorification, as we've just been speaking about, was filled with humility. He was acknowledging that the true glorification should be based on one's actions and actual qualities rather than just mere words. But this humility that he displayed so perfectly did not lead him to inaction or to despair. Instead, he took up his duties with full dedication and became such a great and saintly king. So, how can we cultivate humility without falling into these material manifestations that appear similar? It comes from recognizing that everything we have comes from Krishna and should be used in his service, has been given to us in order to be used in his service. And that these self-deprecating thoughts, these negative thoughts towards ourselves, are ultimately just going to discourage us from our devotional service. Because if we are constantly internalizing that we are just not of value and not of worth in our material and our spiritual lives, we're going to lose our inspiration and our motivation to stay determined and engaged in our devotional lives. And a wonderful way to realize and embody this is by associating with wonderful devotees who lift one another up. And there's such a wonderful culture in devotee communities of finding wonderful qualities in others and sharing that with them and praising the good qualities in those around us. And it's so lovely and nourishing and conducive to that healthy self-esteem and conducive to the realization of our eternal identity. And part of that culture also is receiving that praise with humility, and not allowing it to make us proud, which is the material affliction that falls on the other end of this spectrum, but receiving praise with humility and then giving praise to others. So the two aspects of this beautiful culture of devotee engagement helps us to cultivate that humility and to build that healthy self-esteem that's rooted in our true spiritual identity. And the other way to understand the difference between the two and to familiarize ourselves with the true mood of humility is through reading, is through study. And when we hear the glories of Mahaprabhu or the glories of Prithu Maharaj or the glories of Queen Kunti, all of these wonderful personalities who embody perfect spiritual humility, and if we familiarize ourselves with that mood as expressed by them, then we can understand how to discern that humility from what we may be experiencing as these material afflictions. So, true humility is a product and conducive to spiritual strength. And it allows us to see ourselves as we truly are, as eternal servants of Krishna, fully dependent on his mercy at every moment. And unlike these qualities of low self-esteem, which arise from bodily identification, genuine humility is rooted in true spiritual knowledge and conducive to in deepening our relationship with Krishna. And when we embrace humility, we become free from the constant burden of false ego, for which humility is the remedy, is the medicine. And in this state, we no longer need that external validation, nor do we, despair and ruminate on our own shortcomings. Instead, we just take shelter in Krishna's love, knowing that He accepts us as we are and also lifts us beyond our present limitations. So humility, it really is that foundation, the only foundation for our spiritual lives, which will allow us to gradually cultivate our eternal loving relationship with Krishna. Yeah, I think I'll pause there. Does anyone have any corrections or questions? It's such a nice little crew today. Right. Mm. 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 Yeah. Mm. Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, so in the same way that we have to be able to discern between low self-esteem and humility, on the other side we have to be able to discern between confidence in our devotional service and pride, and a false sense of pride. And it's a similar discernment process that needs to take place, and a good reflective practice I think that we should all engage in to ensure on both ends of that spectrum that the quality we're creating is the appropriate one and the spiritual one. And probably like there are similar, that in the sense that we can look to Shastra and see where confidence is spiritualized and is displayed in its perfected state, and then compare that with our own experience in order to see whether what we're expressing has a similar resonance with that, or whether it's coming from a more materialistic state. And I think if we sit with that in our hearts, we can often come to an answer about whether what we're experiencing and displaying is truly spiritual, or it's a material affliction that is sort of disguised as something spiritual, which is very easy for it to happen to us when we begin to endeavor spiritually, that our material conditioning and afflictions can disguise themselves as spiritual qualities, and we have to endeavor to ensure that our material conditioning doesn't manifest in our spiritual life, and that we're able to discern between the two. And what Srila Prabhupada was saying about observing the result, and if the result of our actions or our mentality is a deepening of our faith and spiritual enthusiasm, then we can understand that to be spiritual. Whereas if the way we're acting and thinking is, causing our faith to become unsteady, or taking away from our devotional enthusiasm, that's a very clear indication that it's coming from a more materialistic place. But yeah, that's really lovely. Thank you. Prabhu. Right, you said like how to be humble, but also avoid being like hurt or like exploited. Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think most of the time, thankfully, in devotional communities, we can be open and humble without that fear being present, because, Krishna willing, we are surrounded by such wonderful people here, and that we won't experience that exploitation or hurt from other people, and we can just be safe to be open. Out in the world, obviously, it's a bit different, and you don't have that same assurance that your openness won't be met with kindness and acceptance. So yeah, I mean, we do have to be discriminating in when we're more so out in the world about the degree to which we can remain open. I mean, personally, I sort of value openness a lot, and I'm inclined to not compromise that even if I'm out in the world, but sometimes that comes with being hurt from time to time. So yeah, it's actually a wonderful question about how to know which times call for openness and which times call for a little bit more self-protection. I don't have a clear answer on how to discriminate those two, but at least in our devotional communities, usually, hopefully, we can practice that openness and deepen that openness. But sometimes if you're open with other people, it brings the openness from them also. And so you put people into a more loving state just by being open yourself. So if you can find the courage to do that, oftentimes your courage can bring forth the courage of others. But you do have to maintain the use of your intelligence amidst different contexts and discern whether that's appropriate. I'm not sure if that really answered your question. It was a very good question though. Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. Lovely Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki.